Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you my lesson planning process. Now this is the abridged version, so if you want to see the real-time version where I walk you through in detail the whole process, you can tap on the screen at any time during this video. That link is also down in the description box as well as at the end of this video. Now the first thing I do when I am preparing a main lesson block or unit study is collect all of my resources that I'm going to use for that main lesson block. It could be books and kits and other projects that I have in mind. I also have this composition book here that I am going to use in order to write down some of my ideas. I am later going to transfer that to the computer so that it is in a shareable format. Now, prior to doing this, I actually recorded a video on all of the resources that I was going to use for this unit, but as the lesson planning process was underway, I realized that I needed other books that I did not show in that video, so if you're curious about the additional resources that I used, you can see them in the review video. At this point, I am looking through our Botany Main Lesson book from Live Education. It is a Waldorf-inspired curriculum that we used previously for our Botany Main Lesson block, but we didn't complete this main lesson block, and so I do want to tackle a few more lessons in this main lesson block. So I am going through that main lesson book, and I realize, hey, I've got a few books that could complement that main lesson block, and I go into my unit study bins in my homeschool cabinet, and I am looking for a couple of books that I know that I have. And one of them is a poetry book that I want to use for this main lesson block because I'm not crazy about the poems that are suggested in the Waldorf curriculum. They are fine poems, but I remember reading this book a couple years ago and really liking a few of the poems in it. I already flagged the pages that I liked from the last time we read this book, and so it's pretty easy to find the poems that I want to use this time around. So I'm back in the main lesson book. I get distracted pretty easily, and I realize, hey, there's another book that would work really well for this. And so I go back to that unit study bin and I grab this book called Plants Up Close. So now I'm in my bookcases looking for yet another resource that I'm pretty sure I have, but I cannot find it anywhere. Back into my unit study bin, and later I'm going to find a book that's going to work just as well in my bookcase. Now this is a lot of the lesson planning process. It's a matter of getting started, realizing I've got something that can work, taking a break, finding that resource, and then coming back and sitting down and working on the lesson plan again. When you're working with a unit study or a main lesson block, the lessons aren't quite figured out. So this whole process also involves figuring out which lessons I'm going to do and which resources I'm going to use in order to complement those lessons. Now, during this time, I also had my son begin doing some of the reading for this unit, and that's because this lesson planning process took longer than expected, and I got started a little bit later than I would have wanted. So while this took the entire week in order to complete, I only scheduled 2 weeks for this main lesson block, which means that we were working on these projects while I was lesson planning. Now that's actually not that unusual. That's happened before actually pretty often. And what I'll do is I will get started on something that I know we're going to do, either a book we're going to read or a project that we plan to do, and I will get that going even while I am still lesson planning so that we make the best use of our time. And that's what we did during this week. We had a ton of hands-on projects that I wanted to do, and so we set out to doing them even while we were still lesson planning. So I am in the final throes of lesson planning at this point. I am putting out my last few lessons with the resources that I want to use. And at this point, I can move into the computer and put it all into a Google Sheet. And this way it is easy to share and also it's easy to edit. Now I don't usually use Google Sheets for my lesson planning, but recently I saw Michelle over at A Common Life use it and use a really cool feature, which was the checkbox feature, which I really loved, and so that's why I am doing this in Google Sheets this time around, but you can also just use Excel sheets, or you can even just handwrite them into a composition book the way that I did previously. So now we're in Google Sheets and I am going to create a couple of different columns. And the first one you can see that it says books and then I say date and done. And so this lesson plan is going to be a little bit different than the ones that I've done before in that it's not going to be tied to a particular date or a day. That date column is going to remain empty and you can fill in a date afterwards or you can just leave it blank. It's also going to be just in the list format. I am not going to assign days for each of these lessons. I am just going to assign all the lessons that we want to do, or rather I'm going to list them all. I'm also going to list all of the hands-on projects that we want to do, and this has a great amount of flexibility because some of these things don't need to go in chronological order, so whenever we have time to do one of these projects, we'll go ahead and fit it in rather than trying to do them in order, which is great. For some units, it doesn't work for every unit. All right, so you can see that I've got a ton of hands-on projects for this unit and it's going to be hands-on rich. There's not going to be a lot of writing, but I do want to add a number of lessons that we can read and discuss rather than write down, and that is in the third large column. And then in the fourth column, I'm going to add all the lessons that we're going to do that have an artistic expression, because doing a botany main lesson block is rich for artistic work like drawing or watercoloring or painting, and so I definitely want to add a lot of those into this main lesson block. Once that's all complete, I'm actually going to change the font because that font's a little bit hard to read. The check boxes are great because once we print this out, we can just check them off as we go. You can also check them off within the program if you don't want to do a paper lesson plan. I've also added a couple of extra lines so that we can fill in some extra books or lessons in case I did not foresee that we would do them. And that's a great option if you want to do record keeping in addition to your lesson planning. You can go ahead and write in extra things like field trips or other projects that you do. So if this video didn't provide you enough information on my lesson planning process, don't worry, you can see the real-time video. That video is linked on the screen right now, as well as the complete playlist for this unit. And don't forget that if you want to see what we're up to on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.